Hello, everyone. I'm Sandra Bargman, and welcome back to the Edge of Everyday. Now at maximizeu.life and streaming on all your favorite podcast platforms. Are you a change maker? Do you walk between worlds, between cultures, between systems? If you answered yes to any of these questions, the Edge of Everyday is the place for you. In a nutshell, this podcast is about pushing boundaries and exploring rough edges. Through conversations and shared stories with friends and colleagues, it's my hope that we can begin to understand our edges. And what I mean by edges is those places where we are fearful, those places where we are resistant to change, those places where paradox and contradicting identities live in our beliefs and in our understandings, both individually and collectively. We live in edgy, challenging times. We cannot keep looking away from the ugly or from the difficult, and silence is no longer an option. Life isn't black or white, it's both. And I want to talk about that. I want to face the tension of paradox, and I want to engage in the hard conversations. I want to explore the rough edges between our light filled brilliance and our dark, shadowy corners. Because the more we recognize our own edges and get real about them, the more we can help others to do the same. And that, I fully believe, can help to change the world. So, thanks again for tuning in. Today, we are live in the hive with the multi-talented and multi-award winning performer, host, and raconteur, Richard Skipper, for a spirited conversation about the power of positivity, the rough edges of ambition and embracing our third act potential, the shifting landscape of the New York cabaret scene, and of course, we'll hear great stories from his treasure trove of performance history. So without further ado, it is time to introduce our guest. Richard Skipper is a celebrated entertainer, writer, and master of ceremonies, and has built a reputation as a multi-talented performer with a passion for Broadway, cabaret, and classic Hollywood entertainment. Richard is perhaps best known for his tribute performances as Carol Channing, the iconic star of Hello Dolly. His portrayal of Channing earned him widespread acclaim, and he became one of the most well-known Carol Channing impersonators in the entertainment world. He performed as Channing in various venues across the country, including cabarets and theaters, playing homage to her with a combination of humor, reverence, and a deep understanding of her career and personality. In addition to his dynamic cabaret performances, Richard created Richard Skipper Celebrates, a series of live events, interviews, and blog posts that honor various figures in show business. These celebrations cover a wide range of topics, from Broadway history to classic Hollywood, and they often feature interviews with notable entertainers, singers, and theater personalities, and they have become a staple in the New York cabaret and theater community. His many awards include 4 MAC Awards, Manhattan Association of Cabarets and Clubs, and a Bistro Award. Beyond his cabaret work, Richard has also established himself as a writer and public speaker. He frequently gives talks and lectures on Broadway history and the lives of famous performers, preserving the rich legacy of American theater. Welcome, Richard Skipper.
Wow. I'm impressed with my resume. No, I wish that you could call me every morning and read that to me. It's perfect.
Exactly. Now, this is why I love a big fat CV. My husband's always like, don't just get into the conversation. And I'm like, no, we're never going to get to all that stuff. It's like they can see it in the show notes. But I said, no, I'd like to see their reaction to having it read. It's so tender and glorious. As are you, my friend.
Oh,
Welcome to
thank
the
you.
edge of every
So are
day.
you. And what a gift you are. And I mean that sincerely. I mean, what you give and what you have turned, I remember the conversations you and I had when you were just starting to do this. And I'm a fan. Uh, you asked me, I'm going to put this out there. You asked me before if I watched bits and pieces of it. And I said, I watched the whole episodes. I mean, once I get sucked in, I mean, it's really wonderful to have this in the background while I'm working, which is the way that I listen to and experience most podcasts. Uh,
Mm.
for those out there who are like, I don't have the time, you just
Yeah,
fit it into what you're doing and make it
yeah.
work.
I love that. And thank you for doing that. And I do the same. You know, I wasn't a podcast listener prior to making the decision, COVID sort of pushing me and watching other people podcasting and kind of going, what's this world of podcasting and contemplating even doing it. And I'll tell you what, it has changed my life for the good. The friends that I have made, the travel that I have done, I can trace back to the Edge of Everyday podcast, transforming the solo show into this podcast. And yes, you were there at the beginning.
Well,
And
I think about what Rogers and Hammerstein, or Oscar Hammerstein actually said, if you become a teacher by your students, you'll be taught. And it's so true. I learn, and I'm sure you feel the same way,
as lifelong curiositives.
as our guests, their lives unfold. And the one thing that we all have in common, regardless of what side of the microphone you're sitting on, every single person, Christian, non Christian, Jew, non Jew, Republican, Democrat, the one thing that every single person on this planet has in common is that we want, we desire, we require to be acknowledged.
Yeah. Seen, heard, and connected.
Exactly.
Indeed. Indeed. Beautiful. Well, I like to always share with my listeners how I know my guests. I'm sure you've gathered that Richard and I know each other. I know Richard. Well, we met through the cabaret community. I knew of you, but I didn't meet you until I attended one of your performances that a dear mutual friend of ours was performing in. And then re-met you at a party that she was holding. And then we became friends and just kind of felt into each other. And I'm here to tell you, Richard has had me as a guest on his fantastic podcast, Richard Skipper Celebrates. And you can find all of those episodes where?
RichardSkipperCelebrates.com.
Yes.
But it's funny because I mean, whether there is this sense of reincarnation or past lives, or there are certain people that you meet in your life. I know specifically how you and I first met. There are people in my life also that for the life of me, I don't know how we met. And yet
Mm,
I feel that from the first time that you and I met, that we were old friends.
yeah,
It
I
didn't
would
feel like,
agree.
is this somebody that I want to nurture a friendship with? I don't know if people have those conversations,
Right.
or don't have the time. But meeting you for the first time, it was as if we have known each other a long, long time.
Yeah, we just jumped right in. And I think I'm going to take it further and say that I think you and I are both the types of people that that we're willing to do that if we sense it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And
Amen.
yeah, amen indeed. Okay, well, we're going to dive into the questions I like to ask all of my guests. Oh, what identity, Richard Skipper, do you lead with?
Depends on what day of the week it is.
Thank
I
you.
no,
Perfect. I'm with you.
it's so funny because I have friends. I have one of my favorite astrologers, monologist. She's always all of her books are written with the feminine energy.
Mm,
She writes for women, but I always say, and the men out there too, who
mm,
share this energy. So there are some days where I may feel like a god, and there may be days where I feel like a goddess. And there are days when I feel like, what am I doing here? And there are
Mm.
days when I know exactly what I'm doing here. And it just goes, we live in a world right now where everyone's caught up in the synergy of everything that's going on around them. And I've made a decision. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead in our story,
You,
but you talk about the third act. Um,
mm.
my third act, I'm getting off the merry-go-round, and I mean that in a positive way.
Oh, I totally get it. Oh
I'm
my God, I can't wait to talk. Yeah.
I'm stepping away from Meta, social media,
Mm.
and what is very, very interesting is the triggers that this has brought out in so many of my friends. I've been told that I was committing career suicide by leaving Meta. People are like, well, how will we stay connected? And I'm old enough
Do you remember
to
that phone?
remember when we didn't have it. What was that?
Yeah.
I
Do you
didn't hear
have
what
a
you said.
telephone? Yes. Do you
Yes,
have it?
yes. I remember those days. One of my first jobs in New York was working for the Green Room Answering Service. And when an agent or a casting director would call and they'd say, I would like to list the following people. And they
Mm.
would give me like 25 names, and I would write them in longhand with a pen, writing it furiously. And then I would go in and I would have to beep each one of these people and hope that they would get to a payphone
Right.
in
Oh, I
a timely
remember those
manner,
days. Ooh,
so that they would not miss a go-see or the
yeah.
possibility of
An
being seen.
opportunity. Yeah.
And so I've just made this decision. Um, I don't want to get political, but
Get
Zuckerberg.
political.
Well, Zuckerberg, when he stated that there was going to be no fact checking on the platform, and
Mm.
then I started seeing changes. That there's I could do a whole show on this and what
Yeah.
I've discovered. But last night I was watching an interview with Chris Hayes, who has a new book out called The Siren's Call.
Oh,
And
ooh.
do you know
Love
about this?
this. I
Um,
don't.
I'm
How
chomping.
do I not? I follow him.
Well, guess where he's going to be on Saturday night? In Kingston. Yes,
Oh
he's
my.
he's doing a book signing, and I want to see if I can get there because I would like to reach out to him about possibly having him on the show because the very things that he talked about last night are the very things that have bothered me about social media. And
Mm.
I was talking to a friend yesterday, and I was going through my litany of all the things that I didn't like about it. And he said, obviously, something kept you there for a long time. What was it that you liked about it? And I had to think about that for a moment. And then I realized that when we first got on social media, it was about engagement.
Yeah, it was brand new and exciting and full of kind of chaos and excitement. Yeah.
And we've gone beyond the engagement to
Addiction.
we feel that we are engaging with one another when we hit the like button
Yeah.
or when we hit the share button. And there was a case recently where a woman, 35 years, she was in the education world as a teacher. She taught special needs kids. And she, whether it was inadvertently, purposely, who knows, she hit the like button on a political post on Facebook. And the next day they ousted her. They
Yeah.
fired her. She was let go simply because she hit the like button.
Yeah.
And then I was talking
Unbelievable.
to a friend of mine just a few days ago, and she said that she made a comment about the halftime show at the Super Bowl, and she was accused of being a racist.
Incest.
And I said, well, first of all, the people who know you're not a racist. And why are you engaging with people that you don't know? And one thing for those that who want to stay on social media and are perfectly happy there, my advice to all of you out there is you don't have to respond to everything.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah. So the identity of letting go of stepping fully into the third act of one day I'm going to experience my masculine side. One
Hmm.
day I'm going to experience, you're going to fully step into your edge of every day. I'm
Every
going to
day.
explore both the yin and the yang of my life.
Yes.
I love that. So, what worlds do you walk between?
The worlds that I walk between are uh, the worlds of sheer abandonment. I mean, sheer abandon is what I meant to say, and fear as
Mm,
well. Um, every day in the business that we're in, it's taking chances. It's
yeah,
saying, I'm going to walk down this path and I'm going to take that chance.
yeah,
Um, right after the first of the year, we lost Linda Lavin. And I went down the rabbit hole watching all these interviews with her. And during COVID, which changed a lot of paradigms for all of us, yours with this podcast, mine with my podcast at the time. But she said that she was watching, she was on the internet one day and she saw, and you may remember this, when the Broadway community was going to celebrate Stephen Sondheim.
mm,
And she introduced the song The Girl From, which is the parody of The Boy from Ipanema.
right.
And she wrote, which was written by Stephen Sondheim, and she wrote and said, how would you like to have Linda Lavin perform The Girl From on your show? And of course, they immediately jumped out to her. And she said that throughout her entire life, this was one of those light bulb moments, that she realized that if you don't reach out and say, this is what I need, this is what I would like, that you're not on other people's radars.
Yeah.
We all go through life, talk about walking on the edge of what are people thinking about me? Well, I've got a big surprise, everybody. They're not thinking about you. And they're not,
Of
they're
course.
not.
No,
And
my phrase is nobody cares. Yeah. Yes.
until you put it out there, when Danny and I got married, we were one of the first same-sex couples to get married in Rockland County. And we were interviewed by one of the local news stations. And I said, I am positive that on any given night, my neighbor, Grace, next door, uh, the people in the church, Kate, who lives in the house on the corner, are all sitting there going, I wonder what Richard and Danny are doing tonight. I don't think that thought process. And we live, lead a very full life. But there are many nights where the excitement of our evening is getting Final Jeopardy. So
I love it.
but Linda Lavin said that she reached out, she got that, and I started trying this myself, and certain things are coming my way
Yeah.
that I don't
This is
think,
part of your third act.
part of my third act, that
Yeah.
people would have thought, uh, we're doing this tribute to Jerry Herman. Let's get Richard Skipper. But I see that they're doing a tribute to Jerry Herman, and I go, I would really like to be a part of this if there's an opening. And those openings are happening.
Yeah. Excellent. Oh, my friend, fantastic. Yeah. The power of just stepping out of your comfort zone and asking for what you
Yes.
need and want.
Yes. And, we all, again, we look at what just happened in California with the fires. And my publicist lost his home. He lost everything. He
Oh my.
lost everything. And he was Carol Channing's publicist. He was Esther Williams' publicist. He was Bob Hope's publicist. Blackwell, the worst best. He was worked for him. All of that, those things are gone.
Yeah.
And I know that some people say they're only things. They're not things. They're things that are attached to memories. I mean, you're sitting in this room right now. You can look around and you may remember the poster that's behind you and, and what it felt when you saw that poster for the first time. And these things that on a daily basis, we basically take for granted.
Yeah.
Uh, and yet each and every object has made a significant impact on our lives on some level if we take the time to think about it.
Absolutely. I love it. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not going to ask any more questions. I want to dive in further. Where it's a half an hour, 20 minutes, and we've only just asked our two. I knew we were going to just the stories, folks. Yes. If we go over, I'm down with that, my friend. Just be prepared. Okay. So you mentioned your marriage. To you were one of the first to get married in Rockland County, which I love. And I remember I've seen this that Josh Ellis
Hmm.
married you. Yes, and I know Josh from the interfaith community as well. I attended One Spirit with him.
And are
Um,
you aware that he just got married?
I am. I saw
And
that on.
I sang at his wedding.
Oh, isn't that Mark? Oh,
Yes,
he's
yeah.
great. He's the best. Well, the reason I bring that up is because I loved. I did a massive deep dive on all both of your websites. And for people listening, it's richardskipper.com and callondolly.com. So I really just read through everything and it, you know, overwhelming. As I said to Richard before we hopped on, I said, Richard has forgotten more than I know about an industry that I've been in my entire adult life. And there you have that. But anyway, this is what Richard, I'm reading this because it's a great seg into where we want to go. Richard Skipper is the embodiment of the spirit of Dolly Levi.
Mm.
He is an enthusiast, a word that has also been applied to Thornton Wilder, who wrote the play that Hello Dolly is based on, The Matchmaker. Richard celebrates when others criticize. He forgives when others find faults. He understands the hard work of theater, but hasn't become jaded or discouraged. In short, he is the perfect person to chronicle Hello Dolly, allowing a large number of people associated with the musical to have their say. Richard and Dolly are a perfect match. I loved that.
I love it.
Tears,
I don't even
tears to
remember
your
reading
eyes.
it. Wow.
Tears to your eyes. I love that. Well, so okay. So folks, d- Richard, I saw Richard's show at the end of it was the week between Christmas and New Year's at the Green Room. The name being still going strong, Richard Skipper celebrates the history and legacy of Hello Dolly. And this particular episode had Clea Blackhurst, the powerhouse. And, and I read this, who is to Ethel Merman what who Richard Skipper is to Carol Channing. I love that. Anyway, why Hello Dolly? Tell us the story of what drew you into Hello Dolly. And then we're going to get into what drew you into Carol Channing and eventually impersonating her.
Do you mind if I flip the two?
Certainly go for it.
It started with Carol Channing.
Ah,
I I grew up in South Carolina. Well, I've talked about this in other shows, but I was I am a product of 1960s and 70s television.
yeah, you and me both. We're pretty
And
much the same age. Yeah.
yes, and when you think about what the and I was thinking about this, do you remember in 1974 when That's Entertainment came out?
Oh, totally.
And this nostalgia craze took over the country. And all of these stars started appearing on talk shows and everything. The interesting thing about this, and when That's Entertainment came out, it was celebrating a genre of movies that were no longer being made. And yet, the last movie that is depicted in that is Gigi, which was only 20 years prior to that.
Fire. Yeah.
And if you and I and our viewers were to think now about a movie on the level of That's Entertainment chronicling 20 years ago, it just wouldn't happen because it
Yeah.
was a different era. Also, these television variety shows that I grew up wanting to be a part of, that's what I wanted to be in show business about. Um, these television shows were an extension of vaudeville.
Yeah.
And because vaudeville had only ended 30 years prior to
Hmm.
me being born and these television shows. So
Yeah.
I grew up watching these larger than life people. You asked earlier about the identity, and I said some days I feel like a god, and some days I feel like a goddess. Most of these people that I gravitated to, and I don't know what the thread is, but a lot of gay men are attracted to these larger than life women. And
Mm.
one of those women that I discovered through that world was Carol Channing. And
Mm.
I became obsessed with her. And I would get up and I would perform at parties. And when I came to New York, open mics and things, not dressed as Carol, but just getting up and imitating her to the best of my ability, never thinking that I would have a world about that. Um, I remember the night that the movie version of Hello Dolly was shown on CBS for the very first time in 1974. And I remember watching this film, and there was something about that world of just stepping out and bursting into song and being part of a world and going after what you wanted to be a part of.
Yeah.
And that was always in the back. Then, when I was 19 years old, shortly after I moved to New York, I lived in the North Bronx, and a local church theater group, uh, they were doing Hello Dolly. And I went in and I auditioned, and I got the part of Barnaby Tucker. And, but this message, years later, and it's a long, long story, but I'll try to shorten up. But through circumstance, I got the opportunity to perform for Carol Channing, and she liked what I did. And that was the beginning of a 20-year friendship and a 20-year relationship with her. And then there were certain circumstances which I will not go into, except to say, read a contract when you get a contract, because I signed a bad contract with someone that I ended up going into litigation for 7 years with, and my performing career as Carol Channing came to a complete halt. This
After
had nothing to do
20
with,
years.
after 20 years. It had nothing to do with Carol. As a matter of fact, Carol wanted to go in there and fight on my behalf, and I would not let
Oh.
her. And so when she got her star on the Palm Springs Walk of Fame, I was invited. This was 15 years ago. I was invited as her guest to be with her when she got the star dedication. And we were sitting on the sofa having a conversation like you and I are doing right now. And she said to me, Richard, you know more about Hello Dolly than I know. Why don't you write a book about this? So
Mm.
I started chronicling. That's what the website Call on Dolly became. I started chronicling the history of Dolly through the eyes of the people that experienced it.
Yeah.
And nothing on that page is secondhand information. Everything is as they experienced it.
It's an extraordinary website.
Thank you. And so this past year, I mean, COVID uh, created a huge bump in the road, and I wanted to get back to performing. And as you said earlier, I had a 20-year career performing as Carol Channing.
Yeah, yeah.
I in Vegas and Atlantic City, cruise ships. I traveled the world, and that world is gone
Yeah,
now.
COVID, yeah, obliterated it. But before you go on, I want to ask about the book.
Well, I put all my eggs that are very expensive right now. I put all
Well
my
done.
eggs in one basket. And this person that I hope he's watching, but he don't do anything without me. Don't do anything without me. Don't do any. And he's connected in the business. So I've got the photographs. I've got the connections. I've got every. Don't do anything without me. Don't. And every time I would say, "Let's get together and let's try," he had not even seen a proposal. Um, he was busy, working on his own projects, all these things. And then one day I come home. There's a message on my phone that says, Richard, I think your ship has sailed. No one's interested in your book. And of course, I called him and said, talk about walking on the edge. I called him and said, "What do you mean no one's interested in my book? Who have you spoken to? What have you told them? What have they seen? What is it about this book that they are not interested in?" Well, I want to tell you that moment just knocked the wind out of my sails.
Sure.
And then, I it's like, what is the next chapter of my life going to be? Is it
Mm.
going to be this book? Is it going to be me as a performer? Is it going to be me as a podcaster? What is the next chapter? And so I essentially put this book on a back burner.
Mm.
And I was asked to kick off Anne Kittredge that you mentioned earlier. She and I both were asked to be a part of cabaret festival, Capital Cabaret in Washington D.C. And
Mm.
so I'm thinking I'm going to go back into my performing world, but what am I going to do?
Yeah.
They knew Carol Channing, that was the hook, but what do
But
they
you
know?
didn't, yeah, you weren't going to impersonate then.
No, my those impersonation days are long gone.
Yeah.
And so, but what is the next chapter?
Yeah.
And so I was asked last January to do a talk at a local library on the actual 60th anniversary of Hello Dolly opening on Broadway. And I have a career coach that I'm working with now.
I know.
And she said, "What are you doing to make this, uh, what are you doing to put a value on your work? And how are you going to," because I was going to put a new show together. And what is it that I can tap into? And then she said, "Why not combine the two?" And I called James Beeman,
Mm.
who became my director. And I
Yeah.
said, "James, this isn't what you and I talked about, but this is my idea." And before I could even get it out, he said, "This is it. This is what you need to do." And
Yeah.
so I put this show together with James Beeman. He reached out to Dan Pardo, who, by the way, played for Clea Blackhurst when she did Dolly at the Goodspeed Opera House.
Oh,
And
right. I read that. Yeah.
our first time in a studio, I'm meeting Dan for the first time. And James and I have a career, a history together. But we walked into this room and James would say something, and then underneath, Dan was tinkling at the piano. I would say something, and he would say, "Well, why not this?" And it felt like firecrackers were going off. I felt this synergy, this collaborative energy that was in the room that I absolutely thrive off of. I
Mm.
love that. I'm a bigger than life personality myself.
Really?
Yes.
Get
And
out.
so when I'm working in a rehearsal studio, sometimes directors and musical directors are a little cautious to say, "Why don't you do this or why don't you do that?" Because they feel that I already know what I'm doing. And my last director for my last show that I did said, "Your instincts are very good. I trust that you know what you're doing." And but I like to get that input from time to time
Sure.
on
Of
where I
course.
go with this. So we put the show together. We opened the show, and this past year, I mean, the show took me to Palm Springs and to Santa
Mm.
Monica and to London.
So,
And
real quickly, the show is a hybrid of the remind. Tell people quickly, it's a hybrid of you performing and singing songs and telling stories about this entire career and the history of Hello Dolly and weaving in performers. Anyway, uh-oh, you froze. Come back.
is there something I can do? Can you? Uh,
There you are.
okay, good. James refers to the show as a musical TED Talk. And
Perfect.
I
I love,
love that. And
yeah.
this new show that I'm about to do, called Everything You've Always Wanted to Know About Richard Skipper, But Were Afraid to Ask, is going to take the elements of that show and put the energy on me, you
You,
know,
yes,
as
exactly.
being the center of attention as opposed to Dolly.
As yeah.
But in answer to your question, and I know a long-winded answer, but Hello Dolly is about taking chances. It's about stepping outside of your comfort zone and getting out there and saying, yes, this is what I want, and I'm going to go after that. When you think,
Amen.
there's a great speech in Dolly where she talks about money, and she said it can kill or it can cure. We're experiencing this in the world, folks. It's
Dude,
amazing.
no, it's that's why I wanted you to get to that because it's
Yes.
so apropos to where we are. Timelessness of this message and so perfect for where we are.
So you've got Horace Vandergelder, who is a half a millionaire, and $500,000 in
Which
Yonkers
back
in
in that
his time
time.
was a lot of money. And then you've got Dolly Gallagher Levi, who has, as she says in her opening lines, I've been living from hand to mouth. She is this woman who's come up with this idea that she can get through life by helping others.
Mm.
And so, varicose veins removed, uh, ears pierced, pierced ears replugged, all of these little cards that she's giving out at the beginning. And it's farcical because it is a farce,
Yeah.
but she's a Jane of all trades. She is doing what she needs to do to get through each and every day. And I think that that's what it is about that musical, and then the alchemy of all of these elements of Thornton Wilder and
Mm.
Jerry Herman and David Merrick and all of these people. And you saw the show. One of the things that I talk about is the lineage that it got to that point.
Mm.
Because it wasn't like one day they woke up and said, this is what we want to do, and these are the people we want involved. There
Right.
were a lot of bumps in that road.
Mm. Glorious. Yeah, no, it's uh, a life of its own. I have a question that I'm going to go back a little bit to the impersonation work. So what was, because I'm fascinated by impersonation,
Mm.
and I'm sure it has, well, I'm not going to lead you.
No,
What
lead me,
well,
because
I just because I think it's very tied into this third act. And so what was the great joy of doing the impersonation work personally for you? And what were some of the shadow aspects that you stepped into, maybe unconsciously or even consciously,
oh,
of
I am so glad you asked that question. Um, the greatest thing that came out of doing that was this friendship with Carol
yeah.
Channing. Think about this for a moment. And God, am I lucky. Um, I can't imagine that, or I can imagine because I experienced it, that a lot of people who impersonate someone will have the depth of a friendship that came out of that friendship with us. I said to Carol one night, at that same conversation on the sofa, it must seem odd to you that I do what I do. It has
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
And and her response was, "But you're so good at it, you know." And but the shadow aspect of it, I and this is the story. Talk about the walking on the edge. Thank you for opening this up. I have spent my entire life walking a tightrope. When I was performing as Carol Channing, with the awards, with the reviews, with the venues that I played, none of that mattered to the people who were making decisions on whether or not they booked me on a major level. And what I mean by that, I walked this line. The straight venues were afraid, and again, these are things that are up very much in the news these days, folks. The straight venues were afraid to book me because they thought they were getting a drag act. The gay venues were afraid to book me because I wasn't your typical drag act. I didn't make fun of Carol. I didn't make fun of my audience. I didn't, I wasn't uh, on the edge in terms of being out there, vulgar, whatever you want to call it. Um, I treated Carol with the utmost respect. And if there were things, and I was asked to do things that I would say, I won't do that because that's against the grain of who she is. When people are impersonating a lot of people, what they are doing, let's say that you're being impersonated. Someone has you down to a T, and they are very good at what they do. Then all the other people that follow in line with that person are essentially filtering their version of who you are through their own lens. And what ends up happening is you get further and further and further away from the heart and soul of what makes Sandra Sandra. So a lot of people who in Carol Channing has been impersonated by more people than we can possibly ever talk about, but people present her through a certain lens. When I did my show off Broadway, backstage said that my show was a lesson in hagiography, and I didn't know what that meant. And for those who don't know, it's the study of sainthood, because they felt that, and at the time, and I still to this day, were they paying me a compliment or was it an insult? Because I had put Carol on this pedestal. But I wanted to present her as I saw her.
Mm.
And as we got to know each other more and more, and we became friends, the desire to perform as her lessened, believe it or not.
That makes
Because
complete sense to me.
I never felt that I could actually live up to who she truly is. And so the shadows, I could walk into a party and you could say, well, what do you do for a living? And I go, I'm an entertainer. And they light up like a Christmas tree. And they all of a sudden have all these questions they would ask me about what my life is like as an entertainer. Same party, someone comes up to me and says, well, what do you do? And I say, well, I do a tribute to Carol Channing. And they form an entire image of what they think that is. Am I just another drag queen? Uh, Another gay? Does he lip sync? Does he, is he singing live? By the way, I sing live, everyone. All these things that people begin to put labels on you. And I think it happens in our regular, everyday life as well. People are so quick to put labels on you. And I look at, again, I'm going to get political for a moment, with Trump going on to the board of the Kennedy Center. And my question is, does he want to be on that board because he wants to elevate the art form to heights that we have never even seen before, which would be
That only he could do.
that only he could do? Or is it a vendetta to get back at the drag shows and the LGBTQ shows and the shows that he has an issue with? And it's very interesting because even when I was performing as Carol, I wasn't a part of the drag world.
Yeah,
I
I
wasn't
can.
I wasn't a part of that world.
Yeah.
And and as a result, there's certain iconic drag queens that are out there who um, I look at their schedules and I go, I never could have had that
Mm.
because again, when a lot of what they do is to rile the audience up to get the audience into a frenzy, and what's happening in these mostly resort areas that they're performing in, as they are riling the audience up and getting the audience excited, the audience drinks more.
Right.
And so, but it's true.
Well, yeah,
And
that's
for me
it.
to get up and say, this is an evening about Carol Channing and the trajectory of her life and career, it's hard to put me in a box.
Yeah.
And that's always been an issue.
Well, was one of the shadows, did it have anything to do about you finding, speaking your own voice on stage?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was at the time, it was very, very comfortable. As a matter of fact, when there was this tug of war that went on for years and years and years. Every time I would say, I want to get up there as Richard Skipper and perform, uh, something would always pull me back in. And I kept getting pulled back in over and over and over again. And so it was almost like I had put a security blanket around me. I'm out there as someone else. It's not really Richard Skipper. But then when you think about it, I'm doing my own singing. I am totally in charge of what I'm doing on stage and taking the audience on that journey. Um, and my shows would range anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours. I remember once performing at the Egg in Albany, and
Great
I'm
space.
a great space. I'm putting my makeup on, and then all of a sudden, I began to have one of the worst migraine headaches that I've ever experienced in my life. And I saw the flashing lights in front of me. I felt like there were needles going in my eyes. And I'm sitting there painstakingly trying to put my makeup on, having no idea what I was looking like. I went out, I did the first act, intermission, and I remember Danny coming into the dressing room, and I said, "Are they leaving?" Because I was so disconnected from what I was doing on stage.
Mhm.
But what I was doing on stage is I was operating on sheer instinct. I was operating on all of those muscles that were in place for me to do what I do. And in the audience, the next day, the review said, Carol Channing, sort of, but better.
Oh,
That
beautiful.
was the review I got. And
Perfect. Oh
Kevin
my
called
goodness.
me about that one.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, an extraordinary career and experience. But moving on, I want to jump to not unpack any more of that. I want to jump ahead to full disclosure. As part of my research, I watched our conversation on your podcast.
Oh,
Oh my, I haven't watched it since we did it. It was so charming. It brought tears to my eyes. It was so sweet and tender and just a lovely conversation. And you were marvelous and it was really down to earth and out there and vulnerable. And I just really enjoyed listening to it. And I have to say that I was kind of surprised when you brought up the word ambition. Like just I didn't remember it in our conversation.
hmm.
So it made me think about you and third act. And I mean, clearly you were an ambitious person, a young person, and and doing what needed to happen. How does ambition line up now with this third act? Is it ambition now, or is it like an internal mission? What's that story with
All of
this
the
third
above.
act? Yeah, no,
All of the above.
perfect answer. I get it.
I've thought about this many, many times, and I have to be honest with you. I haven't seen our interviews since we did it because I never go back and watch them. I want to figure out or go back and see in what context we talked about ambition,
Hmm.
because growing up in a small town in South Carolina, if my parents were ambitious, I never saw that aspect in their lives.
Hmm.
Um, my parents were your typical blue collar family. They did what they needed to do um, to make sure that we were fed, we were dressed to go to school and everything. I left home when I was 18 years old. I left home right out of high school, and I look back on that now. I just a couple of days ago, when as we're doing this, I just turned 64. And I said to Danny, I was 18 2 days ago because it just like it's flown. But I often wondered, and this is not a put down, but I grew up in the kind of town that you're born there, you go to school there, you get married there, you have children there, not always in that order, and you get through life day to day and you die there. That, again, getting political for a moment, is most of the little towns in this country that we live
Yeah.
in. And we take that for granted. And I've often wondered which is better to go through life, to be not to say that it's on any level differently from, but to be perfectly complacent in that world and
Content with a simple life.
content with a simple life. Thank you for putting that out there. Being content with a simple life, or having this incredible drive that I have, which is all consuming. I live, eat, and breathe and think about where I am at this point in my life, where I thought I would be at this point in my life, uh, what has happened, what has not happened. And on one of the exercises that I did going into this year was pages of gratitude of
Mm.
what has happened in my life in the past year. Because on so many levels, I think, well, I haven't really done that much this year. And then I'm talking to friends and they're going, oh my God, Richard, you performed in London, you did this, you did all these other things. So I don't know which of those paths are the most comfortable path to be on. But being on the path that I'm on, I realized that that ambition is there, that drive is there, that determination is there. And I also look at my at self at 64. I'm an empath, and I am so in tuned to how precious our lives are, and that things. Yeah, and you've seen my shows many times. I always tell everyone to reach out. I base it on numerology. That's my little trick, everyone. Today's a one day in my life. So it would be the first name that pops up in your newsfeed to pick out with a phone call, and let that person know the impact that they've made on their lives. How many times have, and especially as I'm getting older, I find that this is happening more frequently than I'd like to care to admit, where I talk with someone, one week and the next week they're gone. And
A
it
little
could be,
frightening.
it is frightening. And I don't want to get morbid or anything about
No.
that, but it is so I don't know how much time I
Yeah.
have allotted. But
Embracing it.
I want to do the best that I can possibly do with that time. Again, another reason why I'm stepping away from social media, because I want that time back. I want that time. Friends, reached out and said, uh, how can I be in touch? I go, pick up the phone, call me. And
Right.
if you haven't heard from me in a while, obviously you're thinking about me. Feel free to call me.
So your message of positivity just flows through everything. We're not going to have time to touch on the cabaret world. I'm gonna have to have you back, clearly. Um, but your message of positivity, you're very connected to the power of positivity, which, and as an empath, and of course, I know you and I know all of these things, but I also know, there are people that I know who are all about positivity that I feel they spiritually bypass and have a real negativity bias, if you will. And the edge of every day is about the embrace of both, and the certainly the upliftment, but the silver lining that's held in the negative, and the quote unquote the negative, and what is it that this is here to reveal to me, to teach me, to evolve me, all of those things, that we are both the light and the dark. And I see you embracing that in every single way. So what do you think the edge, how does living on the edge of every day work for you? What does that mean to you with your message of the power of positivity?
um to do it, to get up there and don't we put these guardrails around us. It's like going back to what I said earlier, that you think, what are they thinking about me? What
Yeah.
are they thinking about doing this? And the bottom line is, again, they're not.
Nobody
So
cares.
nobody cares. And I look at someone that was very prominent in the cabaret world, speaking of which,
Hmm.
just passed away this past year. And she was very much on the opposite side politically from where I am. And, but she was this anger that she carried around with her all the time. And then when she passed away, I thought, was it worth it? Was it worth it to hold on to
Mm.
that so tightly? I had another dear friend, Barbara Sickman, and for 20 years, her sole ambition was to get this musical that she'd been working on. She even worked with Marvin Hamlish, was one of the composers that worked with her, about Liberace.
Mm.
And anytime I would say, let's get together, let's go out to dinner, let's go do this, I can't because I'm on a deadline. I've got to make sure that this is finished. I've got to do this, and I got to do this, and I got to do this. And I respect that. But then one day she just was gone.
Yeah.
And I go, was it worth it? So, in answer to your question, the bottom line is we have to love what we're doing. We have to, uh, for me, I set out each day and I've got a certain goal of how many people I want to pitch my show to, how many, things that, do I want to do that's going to elevate me, um, both on a spiritual level
Mm.
and on the way that I am perceived in the world.
Yeah.
And again, they don't care.
Right.
but
Well,
but the thing
but
is,
that's what floats your boat.
that's what floats my boat, and that makes each and every day, as Pollyanna-ish as this is going to sound, uh, exciting for me.
Yeah,
And,
I get it.
because I don't know. I mean, in a second, I could get a phone call that could open a door for me that I have been pushing against for 60 plus years, or a door that I've been pushing through for 60 plus years could shut and rattle my fingers. We don't know. So the bottom line is to get out there and to take these chances, to do the things that are going to feed your soul. And one of the things, can I go there for a minute? With the social media paradigm is that we are, everybody is living, first of all, their director's cut of the movie that they want to present to the world. Think about that.
Perfect.
And so I see the world, I see the version of you that you want me to see. Our mutual friend Ann Kittredge may see a completely different version of that I see. And so everybody has their own version of what this is going to be. But what social media has done to all of us is it's put us into two categories. And some people overlap both. And that's we are voyeurs and we are narcissists.
Mm.
And so essentially, what the dopamine that everybody is getting from social media is the idea that you are their audience. Think about that for a moment.
Mhm.
Because if you were not their audience, would they continue to stay on social
Yeah.
media? What are they, if they're not getting that gratification, whatever level that would be, there would be no tendency for them to stay there. And one of the things, I had a situation recently, and I shared this with you, and I'm not going to mention any names, but if they're watching, they know who they are. Um, that someone got very upset with me because I had not been to see a show of this person. My reasons for not being there was not out of a dislike of this person, but always about financial and scheduling. And so it had nothing to do with all of the thoughts that were rushing around in their head as to um, the reasons why I was not at their show. And I'm glad that that happened because it made me look at myself through a lens that I never want to be that person. I never want to be that person that's going to be so obsessed with whether or not you are going to attend one of my shows or not.
Yeah.
And there are people that keep a scorecard. You know it. You know it.
Oh, my
This is
goodness
what I
gracious.
want to do in the cabaret show. But we know that those people are out there. And so I never want to be that person. And so one of the things that I let go of, and especially the show that you came to see, which I am grateful that you came to, was on that Friday night between Christmas and New Year's, which is a strange time to do a show. But I didn't get caught up in, oh my God, how many reservations do I have? Who's going to show up? Who's not going to show up? Same thing when I went to Palm Springs a couple of weeks ago. Um, all I can do is put it out there that I'm doing it. And the people that are able to show up are going to show up, folks. And the people who are not going to show up are not going to show up. And we are so caught up in the world that we are currently living in. And again, Chris Hayes talked about this last night, this world that we are basing our own personal self-worth on the number of likes that we get on a post. And I can post, Sandra and I are appearing tonight at Carnegie Hall. I hope that you can all come see the show. And it can sit there all day and no one responds to it. I can post, I just lost a button, and 5,000 people will respond to it.
Oh, it's remarkable. Yeah. Well, we've got to, I'm looking at time, we've got to come to a close, but I do want to have you back because I do want to talk about a few other things that are on my glorious list with you, and we can check in afterwards on how removing yourself from the insanity of social media has been working out for you. That'll be an interesting follow-up.
Yes, I'd love that.
Excellent. Well, my friend, thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for coming on, sharing your stories, your perspectives, your edges of every day.
Thank you.
Do you have any last couple of words for our audience before we sign off?
Well, I'm going to say the same thing I say at the end of all my shows. Go
Excellent.
out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. And after this show is over, I want you to go to your database, your email list, whatever it is that you look at, and the first name that pops up, reach out with a phone call. Not an email message, not a text message, uh, not on social media, a phone call. And let that person know the impact that they've made on their lives. And so while I'm here, I want to say to you that you make an impact on my life because you live, you walk the walk, and you talk the talk. And there are people who have these platforms and they don't take it beyond that. But I know you well enough to know that you do. And your word means a lot to me.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
And for all of you listeners out there, as we always close our shows, remember you are always at the edge of the miraculous.
Yes.
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 Till we speak again, take good care.
Ah.
Mwah.